everybody. Welcome to Pop-Up University here at Langlab in South Bend. I'm Elizabeth Benny, Director of Community Engagement and a faculty member in the Department of Political Science at IU South Bend. And Pop-Up University is a lecture series by faculty at IU South Bend on interesting topics. And we feature people from a wide variety of backgrounds. This evening, we're delighted to be joined by Susan Moore, originally from Chicago. She is a landscape photographer, and she has made photographs all over the United States and Europe. With research interests in landscape photography, veracity in images, and history of photography, she received a Bachelor of Arts from Columbia College in Chicago, a Master's in Art Education at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and a Master's in Fine Arts from Washington University School of Art in St. Louis, Missouri. Susan is a professor at Indiana University South Bend, where she teaches photography and serves as chair of the Fine Arts Department. Her photography has been exhibited locally, nationally, and internationally, and she has received grants from the Indiana Arts Commission to support her landscape photography projects. She was also awarded a residency at the International Studio and Curatorial Program in Brooklyn, New York. Notably, in multiple years, she has traveled abroad with students as part of IU South Bend's Study Abroad program, training students to capture what they see, feel, and observe in international cities, including Florence, Italy. This summer, she will be co-leading a study abroad trip on documentary photography and Jewish history in Poland, helping students to engage in visual storytelling in 3 Polish cities: Wrocław, Krakow, and Warsaw. Susan found her way into photography with a gift of her first camera from her father. She reports that the camera was a tool for her to organize her thoughts and ideas and a ticket to events and places she could not access without it. These early experiences fostered a love of art and education that have shaped her career as an artist and an educator. Although she has been able to travel to many places since those early days, the camera continues to be a way she organizes her thoughts and discovers and creates meaning in the world. As she'll explain to us tonight in her talk, Disjointed Travel Log, Making Art and Meaning in Vallauris, France.
Wow, that was such a spectacular introduction. I feel like such foreshadowing of what's to come. So I wanted to begin by acknowledging that we are on the traditional homelands of Native people of the Miami, Potawatomi, and Shawnee, and others, and we respect the elders, both past and present, and we thank them for their hospitality. I usually don't read, I usually just talk, but I was thinking about a lot of things and I wanted to not forget anything, so I wanted to read something that I wrote just recently. I'm going to talk about my artwork over an extended period of time as I talk about the Disjointed Travelogue. And although most of my work does not illustrate my values as a humanist, that is to say, my work does not include portraits, my work depicts a formal and visual beauty that represents my sunny personality and hopeful outlook, and I believe in the good in other people. And I've relied on the kindness of strangers, and I have lived a charmed and privileged life. The work that I'm going to show you last, my most recent work, is work that I made in France in the summer of 2022, and it was a magical time for me because of the place and the people that I was with. And it was quite a wonderful experience. I was living very close to the Mediterranean Sea, and any place along the sea always brings me joy. And as I said, I've lived a charmed life, but the news recently has been really alarming for me. And I feel grateful to be with other artists at IU South Bend, a place I feel safe, even when the world around me seems chaotic. Our community of artists on campus and our community of faculty and staff, the folks at downtown South Bend and the South Bend Museum of Art, and here at Langlab. These places are important to me, and I feel privileged to share this space with you and make art with you or alongside you. We make art to make the world better, and we process emotions, we react to events that we see around us. And art can bring us together, so I'm glad to be here with you tonight, and I feel privileged to be able to share my artwork with all of you. And I also want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about my art and to share it with you. So I wanted to begin with a camera. People often ask me, what kind of camera do you have? And I am Ricoh camera, Pentax K1000 camera old. When I was a child, I lived a charmed life, and my father gave me a Ricoh camera. The Ricoh camera didn't last very long. It jumped off of a shelf. I really wanted the Pentax K1000 because it just sounded cooler. But it was a simple camera, light meter, and I shot black and white film, and I fell in love with photography because it allowed me to access places that I couldn't access without it. It allowed me to talk to people that I couldn't speak to without the camera, and it really opened doors for me. One of the first photographers that I saw as a child that really interests me was a woman named Sandy Skoklin, and she created very large sculptures. They're really large. You can kind of see the people kind of in the middle ground of the picture. She would create these sculptures, the dogs and the green room, and then the people would walk in and she would photograph them. And she usually didn't photograph or display the sculptures, although she did later in life. So this idea of thinking about planning a photograph is something that I had thought of for a long time. And I'm kind of jumping around in time a little bit. But after I did grow up in Chicago and learned photography at Columbia College in Chicago, and then I moved to a place where there wasn't any more buildings or things like that, and I photographed this gate. And this gate became very meaningful for me because it's kind of shaped like a house, like a child would draw a house. And I like the idea of a gate, the symbolism of walking through a gate. And I since learned, if you walk into a room and you forget while you were there, it's because you walked through the gate or the doorway. So if you ever get lost, just go back and walk into the room again, and your brain will reset and you'll remember. So I was photographing in this area, and this was at the beginning of graduate school. And I started graduate school thinking that I could do it. I had a positive outlook. And then it was really hard. And suddenly photography wasn't easy anymore, and it was quite challenging. And I kind of stumbled into the garden. It was earlier than now, but it was the end of the season, and I found this tomato that had grown through the fence, and that really kind of set me off in a new direction in my work, and kind of looking at the objects that I found in the landscape and photographing them, manipulating them in a different way. And it kind of changed how I was thinking about my photography, and helped me dig my way out of the hole that I had found myself in, where I was kind of lost in photography. And coming back to the gate, so this is where I was living. This is kind of this was the front yard of my house, and moving from Chicago to this place was very, very different. It was very, everything was different about it. And I was interested in the landscape and also interested in text. So so this is a picture of a book and a picture of the landscape, and they're layered together. And this is actually almost the same picture. It's just a change of the depth of field. I was really fascinated with how how the camera could change space by what was focused on and what f-stop and shutter speed you use. And this is film photography in the olden days, in a color darkroom. And this was a picture close-up of some objects and a picture of a map. And the maps became really important to me in my work, and also language. I find language quite fascinating. And one of the reasons I am a photographer is because language doesn't always work for me. So I found myself making art as a child because symbols and color and lines and shape were much easier for me to understand than words. And but I am fascinated with words and how different words mean very, very specific things, and utilizing words and language in my artwork. So for a long time I have been layering different things together. Sometimes I don't show these images because there's a fascination with the layering, and my work now is much simpler and less layered, although the layers come in and out. I think that we tend to think of life or artwork as a journey from point A to B, and it's not. It's a spiral, and it's backwards and forwards, and so things repeat. These are platinum prints instead of silver. The light sensitive material is platinum onto USGS map. And of course now we don't have map. Well, map. But now really the map, everything is digital. Yeah, so I made a lot of these, and this is an image by a photographer named John Fall. He's one of my favorite photographers because of how he changes the landscape. So it's a picture of the ocean, and there is actually a rock in the ocean there, but he put some string in the foreground to show you, to kind of create a triangle in the landscape. And he also took this picture, which might maybe remind you of this picture. This is Ansel Adams. Everyone knows Adams, hopefully. And so these two pictures together, John Paul saw Ansel Adams, and he's making a joke. His is called, John Paul's picture is called Moonrise Over a Pie Plate, as opposed to Moonrise Hernandez. I think Ansel Adams is amazing, and he brought a lot to photography, but of course because he's so significant, you get to make fun of him. It's just weird. But John Paul liked to do things, wow, this is really hard to see, but he would take oranges, there's oranges, and in logical space, the orange that's furthest from you is smallest. That's how we understand perspective in space. You can see that in the path. But he puts a bigger orange in the background and smaller oranges to kind of change your perspective. And I like that quality of photography, that distortion of space. And the pictures I was making before kind of morphed into more pictures of maps and landscapes, and I was really interested in how the landscape and the map were interconnected, because when a cartographer makes a map, you know, they make compromises. They have to fit the map onto a page, and of course the earth is round and a map is a flat piece of paper. And I think that we have this idea that a map is going to get us from point A to point B, and there's a certain level of veracity in a map. But of course, the map maker, just like the photographer, is changing and fitting the map to fit their ideas and to fit the things that they want to say. And so, yeah, and the symbolism of a map is also really interesting, and also goes back to my love and also struggle with language and words not behaving and not acting in the way that I want them to work. So, yeah, so I made a lot of these images. These are made with a 4x5 camera, a big camera, like this camera, and I finished, that was my grad school project, and I finished that project, and I was so excited and scared and freaked out. South Bend, Indiana, really? And I came to South Bend, Indiana. I imagine that a lot of people came to some of you are from South Bend, Indiana. And I came to South Bend, Indiana, and I drove back to St. Louis and cried. And they said, no, turn the car around, go to South Bend, Indiana. And it's made all the difference. I'm so happy. I have this big, large format camera, and I had a new landscape, a new way to understand the world and how to get from point A to point B. And one of the things that photographers do, and I guess other artists do this as well, is you copy the people who went before you. So my first trip, I drove along the St. Lawrence Seaway to Maine, photographing along the way. And then I went out to Yosemite and photographed in Yosemite, and then I went to Yellowstone, and then I made photographs all over. I should have shown some of the bad photographs. We never tell the students about our mistakes. We just show them the good work. But there was a lot of bad work. And then I had a summer where I knew I was going to be in South Bend, and I said, well, sure, the Indiana Arts Commission, that's what we want to do. So I wrote a letter, and I was successful. And I told the Indiana Arts Commission that I was going to document the greater northern Indiana area, and I found out that I really like to photograph where I am. I like travel photography, and I enjoy that, but I found that photographing in South Bend or in the greater region and photographing things I saw every day was actually super helpful for me, because I could go back when the light was correct, and I really had a better understanding now for what made a good photograph, what I was looking for. And I was still interested in the same kinds of ideas about how the camera works and about depth of field and light and things like that. You can see me down here in the photograph. But it was much subtler and more quiet than the big layered images. And as I was making these photographs, I would go up to people's houses, I want to photograph your front yard, I'm interested in landscape. And I thought of the front yard around these homes as the way in which people in the state of Indiana were keeping their homes in the same way that we have national parks here in Indiana. You have a park in front of your house. But I also was really attracted to the spaces between the houses that seemed different and weren't necessarily kept. And I found those spaces to be really interesting. So I started to photograph what was in between the houses and what makes some of these landscapes about Indiana. And the white picket fence is starting to turn fall. I did this project for a whole year. After a year, I photographed a little bit in the snow and felt like, okay, I had kind of completed this project. And I think this was one of the last images that I made, and this image was in my office, pretty big size image. And also at this time, our gallery director was working at the South Bend Museum of Art, and I got a big show at the South Bend Museum of Art, and I felt like, wow, I was really impressed with myself. And, but of course, like, well, okay, so now you have to make more art. But I really like this image because of the one tree had lost its leaves, and the other tree had its leaves, and the light and the greenness of the landscape. And so I was like, well, I need to make something different. I need to make something new. And it took me, I guess everyone's a little bit different, but it took me about 8 years between finishing my project at graduate school and getting my feet back under me and standing up straight again and making this work in the Michiana region. And I was like, well, that's good, and I need to go faster than that. Life is too short, we have to move faster. And so how do I move faster? So I was like, well, we need to change everything, but also go backwards and forwards at the same time. So I got my film camera out. I love the film camera because it's amazing. And this camera I got when I went to Columbia College, and I actually I give my old cameras to students to use because they come and they don't have a camera, and I'm like, well, here you go. So actually a student was using this camera the other day. And film cameras last forever. My digital cameras, they last like 3 to 5 years. But anyway, I digress. landscape photographers from the early part of the 20th century, Ansel Adams and photographs of the national parks. And I said, well, I'm going to photograph in cities. And so I started photographing in cities and traveling. I do love South Bend, but I find that if I put 8 hours between me and South Bend, then like emails don't mean nearly as much. And then you're asleep, and so it's okay. So when you're asleep and they're awake, and vice versa. This was in Paris, and I think this was also in Paris. There was a photographer named Eugene Ache who photographed right around the turn of the century. I'm sorry, the early part of the 1900s, the previous century, and he photographed kind of everything in and around France. He photographed a lot for painters who would use his images as reference, and he would have been lost to history, but another photographer captured up all of his things when he passed and brought them to the Museum of Modern Art, and so we know who Ache is. And a lot of contemporary street photographers, journalists say that Eugene Ache was one of the first journalists. But he was doing in this image layering of images and the reflections and things like that I was really interested in. And I found that I was finding things that were similar to the past. And Isa Bing was a German photographer who came to France and photographed the Eiffel Tower. So I wanted to go and photograph the Eiffel Tower. And Lee Friedlander, he's photographed all over the Midwest and photographed really odd things. He also photographed our little Statue of Liberty in downtown South Bend. But he had this very famous picture of this bed, and I was walking in Milan and I saw this bed and I was like, oh, photograph that, that's my Lee Friedlander. So I was collecting contemporary images of the past and thinking about how to reformat historical images in a contemporary context. And while I was doing this, I was also, sometimes I would photograph something that was like, well, why did I photograph that? And in photography, you take a lot of pictures, and then you edit your pictures and edit your pictures and edit until you have a smaller package of pictures. And what you do to think about your work is look for the outliers, look for the pictures that don't fit with the rest of the group. So I have this picture, which is really, probably can't really see it on the screen, but there's like a shadow in the middle of the picture, and that was what it was. It was about that light and shadow. And then I have this picture, which was very intentional, this picture of a doorway, but it has very, but it's very minimalist. And then I started to become more intentional about looking for light and shadow and thinking about how much information you need to take a picture. And I liked photographing these images, and they're kind of all over the world where I could find empty spaces. But it was hard because most of our space is not empty. There's things everywhere. And I found this picture, and I was showing my work to someone else, and someone said, that's the Contemporary Museum in Milan. I didn't know that. So I thought that was interesting that some of the spaces were recognizable, and I really liked photographing these spaces. And then I said, I need to kind of move this forward. What am I going to do next? And I applied for an artist residency, and I got an artist residency at the International Studio and Curatorial Program in New York and Brooklyn, which was amazing. So I spent the summer in Brooklyn, and they gave me a tiny studio and said, here, go and make some art. And there were other artists around, and it was fun. Brooklyn's kind of an amazing place. It was in Bushwick, which is, Brooklyn is big. It was in Bushwick, which is industrial. And I took the photographs. The photograph on the left is the film photograph, and the photograph on the right is a digital photograph. And I was fascinated. I don't really know anything about physics. I'm not going to be a physicist in the audience. But the light was fascinating to me that the photograph on the left of film is a picture of a ceiling with kind of a bend in it and light coming in from one side. And then the photograph on the right is a piece of cardboard that's stuck to a piece of paper and a piece of light. But I found that I could mimic what I had done with film, and that was just really fascinating to me. This was what the studio looked like. I switched to digital. I've been working with film for a really long time, but when I got this residency and I just had the summer compressed period of time, I was like, I gotta go with the digital. And yeah, I occasionally use the film. I really enjoy the film, but the digital is just so much faster. So that's what the studio space looked like. And so I started going back through all the film photos I had of these empty spaces and recreating them. I call them maquettes, but that's kind of an exaggeration. They are pieces of paper, and they're kind of stuck together with like sticky tack, and then they fall over and they're done. But I was really impressed with the optical illusions that I could create with the paper and the light, and create these spaces that looked really big, and you know, the space is about the size of this table. It's pretty small. And the sense of scale and things like that. And I had made a whole bunch of these, and they became like a metaphor for my mind of understanding kind of this imaginary space that you can almost walk into, but it's not quite there. There's a photographer named Lori Nix and her partner Kathleen Gerber, and they make very elaborate things that they rephotograph. Photographing sculptures like Sandy Skoklin, the woman from the beginning, and there's numerous photographers who create things and photograph them. Some of them save them, some of them don't. If you're photographing white pieces of paper, if you don't keep them very clean, they get dirty, and then you start again anyway. So I have made quite a few of these, and I have lights with color temperature, so I could make it look like different things, but generally it's white paper on a white background. And I finished these, and I wanted to do something next, but I wasn't really sure what to do, and so I was like, well, I'll go away. I'll travel. And there was a big gap in between, and I didn't want to show you the pandemic work. But I applied for a residency in France, and I was very excited to go to France and to be back on the Mediterranean Sea. This map is kind of hard to read because it's like a screen grab. But this is Italy over here. There's Nice at the edge of Italy and France, and then Marseille is kind of over here. It might not even actually be on this map. And Cannes is close by, and there's a little town called Vallauris, which is actually up in the hills, which was famous for ceramics and pottery. Has been for millennia, for centuries. There's been potters there making ceramic pieces. At one point, the plague wiped out everyone, and they sent a bunch of new people there to make ceramics because they needed the ceramics to keep going. Picasso was there. I always feel like when I say Picasso, I have to tell you that Picasso was not a good man. He was very smart, but not a good man. But he made some nice pottery in France. So I was in France, and I was at this beautiful residency, and the first day of the residency, there were 5 other residents, and we were living in one house. Everybody had their own bedroom, shared kitchen, and the resident director said, welcome, here's some food, and welcome, and now we'll go to the art supply store, and we bought our art supplies, and we bought some, we go to the clay store, because it's famous for clay, although there was only one ceramicist in our group who happened to be from Vincennes, which is odd to me. And then there was a painter and a writer and another painter. But only one ceramicist. But we all bought the clay because it was like, well, clay, we're in France, we're playing with clay. So I started working with the clay, and I had tiny lights because it was in France and I had to come in the plane with me. But similar setup to what I had when I was in New York. And wow, it looks like a white square. This one, you can see the clay in this one. So I started to make these clay forms with a slab roller, and I wanted to make something that was usable, or what looked like it might be usable, but it really wasn't. And so it's a clay slab that I kind of folded into shape, and at the same time, while I was working with the clay, I was just kind of wandering around France. This was a beautiful residency. In the morning, we would all get up at our different times and have coffee, and then we'd walk to the studio, which was just like a block around the corner, and we'd stay in the studio until about 1 or 2, and then you have a long lunch, and if you were very inspired, you go back to the studio, but usually you just walk down the hill to the beach, enjoy the beach, and then you'd do it again the next day. It was this beautiful residency. The resident director was from Quebec, and he was Canadian, and when he first got to France, before the residency, when he had a job as a graphic designer, as he's kind of working up to his dream of overcoming this residency, and he said that because he was Canadian, which is similar to the United States, not exactly, but he would work in the morning, and then he would take like an hour for lunch, and then go back to work, and then his colleagues would come back at like 2 or 3, and they were all refreshed, and he said, well, there's a park. We went rollerblading, we went hiking, and you have 2 hours, 3 hours for lunch, and then you come back and do some more work. And so he encouraged the long, leisurely lifestyle of southern France. But yeah, so we made a lot of, so I was walking around photographing the different things that I saw, and then all of a sudden I realized, oh, I know what to do. So while I was visiting Vallauris, making photographs, I was inspired by the picturesque landscape and the warm Mediterranean Sea, as well as the experience of travel and the emotional displacement of finding myself as a foreigner far from home. And as I moved through the world, breathing and walking and seeing, I find both familiar and strange feeling each day. And I create order and find comfort through my camera and the act of photography in depicting the complexity of these moments. Later in the studio, I would use a projector to project the images onto the ceramic forms that resemble waves, forms made by gently folding the clay into abstract shapes. And I recapture the moments mediated and distorted by the process, like new memories forming in my mind. They are recognizable and strange and misleading. The camera mediates my every experience. So this image is the actual residency building that we were living in. There was a gallery on the first floor, and then we lived above it. And then on the side of the building, there was a sculpture made of ceramics of a man jumping that one of the previous residents had made. And so I have a photograph that I edited and created, and then I'm using a small projector to project that image onto the ceramics. And because the ceramics are three-dimensional, they capture that image, and it becomes out of focus in places, and it becomes distorted by the process. This is an image in Vallauris of the purple flowers. This is an image in the square. There was an artist with like a shiny mirrored doorway, and there's 2 pieces of ceramics. And so one of the pieces of ceramics is creating a shadow within the image. It's kind of breaking up the space. And this is a tree. remember the good things. And it's fascinating to me, particularly traveling with the students, that a student might have a particularly bad week or really miss home. And a year later, they're like, that was the best trip. That was the best experience. Our minds create wonderful memories for us, even if we have some ups and downs. And I like the way in the image, it almost looks like you can walk into the image. And a lot of the things that I've been interested in photography can all come together in these images in the sense of depth of field, the layering of different images, the play and the distortion of space. And this one, I like this one a lot because there's a doorway. This was an old building, like a fort, an old fort on an island, and it had this kind of magical, like, looks like a princess doorway, or like a, it looks very old, and it makes it look like there's a hole in the piece of ceramic, but that was actually the photograph. I also photographed a lot of water and sky. I'm really interested in water and sky as kind of a new direction in my work. After photographing, this is me. I'm on the right there with the big box, and that's Cartier-Bresson in the middle. Cartier-Bresson photographing different things. But I thought about that when I was carrying the big box, although I didn't actually take that picture. Somewhere else did. Let's see. Yeah. So, I think that it's important to remember that art time is different than actual time, and it's not linear, and that's okay. And it's okay to repeat yourself and go backwards and forwards, and it's okay to make mistakes. I feel like when we make research or we make new ideas, that we kind of jump to the end and we say, oh, this is my idea, and forget that all the little things that go in. We have this idea that creativity is that light bulb, but it's not. It's a long process, and you work and work and work, and then you get to the end, and sometimes you go in a circle, and that's okay. I think that words are really important. I think a lot of my students, just like I do, struggle with language and making language make sense, and sometimes you just want to push it all away and be like, no, it's just a picture, I don't want the words. But words are important. It's important to be able to be articulate about what your image is to make sense and to move forward. And plus, it makes more sense to other people if you can explain it in words. I like the idea of a metaphor. I keep my ideas in a metaphorical pantry. And everyone is an artist. The more art is better. I think as a photographer, nowadays, everyone is a photographer because you have a really nice camera in your pocket. Most of us do. Most people have a really nice camera attached to their cell phone, and most people are photographing a lot of things, particularly the newest people are photographing a lot. And I used to fight that and be like, no, they're not photographers, they're using a phone. And that's kind of a worthless habit. It's much easier to think of everyone as an artist and to be inclusive because we need each other, and artists know we all rise up together. Yeah, that's all I have to say about that. Thank you for listening.
Do you have any questions?
Sure.
So in regards to your art, and of course, definitely have a lot of ideas. How do you find the balance of giving each of those projects some time and space to grow instead of makes you
I tend to work on one project at a time. I have lots of different ideas, but I tend to work on one project at a time just because valuable. But one of the reasons I enjoy working in the studio is that I can work independent of the weather. And I can create things in the studio and leave them and come back. And yeah. Does that answer your question? Not really.
It's really fun. So as somebody who follows with envy your study abroad trips, which I know are a huge amount of work, having done one myself, can you talk a little bit about the difference between street photography and documentary photography, and how you talk with students about that, and how you bring, so your Florence trip that's street photography usually, right? So since you've got students who are going on those trips, I think often who are not art majors, right? There are people, so can you just talk a little bit about those two genres and if they overlap? And
Sure. So I enjoy street photography. I mean, street photography is really this kind of 20th century black and white photography of capturing kind of the moment and what's around you. But it's very, I think that we think of it in terms of journalism, and people interpret it that way, but most of the classical street photographers of the 1960s were really interested in formalism and modernism in art, and lines and shapes and patterns, and grayscale, and how the color world is translated into black and white. They were modernists. They weren't really thinking of documenting. I mean, but they were also interested in like climbing on top of things and looking down, and how does that perspective change it? And what if I spin around in a circle while I'm photographing? They were interested in the process and the lines and shapes and patterns. Whereas documentary photography is really meant to tell you a story about something that you don't know. And so the name is escaping me, but the curator at the Museum of Modern Art, he talked about windows and mirrors, and he said that some photographs, like if you see a picture of a pyramid, it's a window. It's something that, I'm sure there's some people in the room who have gone to Egypt and seen pyramids, but for a lot of people, we haven't seen it, and we might not have that opportunity, but we can see a picture of it, and it's a window into that world. Whereas, and so that's documentary photography, showing us something that we can't see without the photographer going there, and it's more to provide us information and ideas. Whereas a lot of photography is a mirror, and you're looking at a picture, but you're actually looking at a reflection of the artist, and not, this image isn't really about statues or about Florence, or it's a reflection of what I saw in that moment in the light and the shadow. I'm excited to go to Poland. I'm a little concerned that we don't have the students' applications. It's challenging. But I've decided I'm going to Poland anyway. I really want to see Poland. But I haven't taught documentary photography before. But it makes sense to combine this historical trip, and Dr. Zwicker has the knowledge of Poland. She had a Fulbright there, so she really has a deep knowledge of Poland, and I have an understanding of photography, but I feel like we're both kind of running at this experience, and it will be really exciting. And I decided that I want to go to Poland no matter what. I want to see the things and love. Johnson Carlson.
And how would you say something about, in your last panel, there's a work graph. You have to be able to talk about your work and express getting the point. But see if you can use your argument. Nobody asked me to be an artist. Why do you ask artists to write? Nobody asked me to make a picture of my research or a photographer or a sculptor. Why do we ask artists to write about their work? I mean, does it privilege the written word, the spoken word? Like, you are asked to do two things, to create art and then be reflective about it. Whereas I'm only asked to be reflective about my work, not to create in the same way. Why should artists? I guess I'm curious about that double responsibility that falls upon artists.
So if you are making pictures or taking pictures and you want to find something beautiful in the world and capture it, that's a wonderful thing to do. And most of the pictures that people make, they're making just for themselves, to remember a moment or an experience or to remind themselves of something. But if you want to communicate an idea, you have to be able to be articulate about it to talk to other people. Because there's just so much noise in the world of images that if you can't say, I'm making this landscape photograph and I'm influenced by these historical people and I'm interested in going to this place and this is how these things relate together, people just aren't going to take it seriously. It's challenging because I feel like there are artists, good artists, I'm missing a name, but it'll come to me in a little while. There's a Southern photographer, and he photographs. He only takes one image of everything, and he's like, I don't need to take a picture. Maybe he's okay about it because I took the picture. But he's famous, and he can say that. And if you're a young person today and you want other people to look at your photographs, you have to be able to write an email or go to a gallery director or come to Langlab and say, I'm interested in talking about this. This is important. And you went to somebody and say, I just want to show my vacation pictures from Yosemite. I went to Yosemite and I had some cool vacation pictures. People might humor you because they like you. Like, that's kind of meaningless. But if you say, I want to show you these photographs of national parks because national parks are meaningful and they're in danger because of animals or because of non-animals or because of climate change, then that's valuable and interesting, right? So, I don't know. But, yes, people
You have
don't...
more pressure in the university setting to be able to do that, or that you have to like it?
Well, I don't want to, people, but yeah. We got to be louder. We have to be smarter. We have to, because otherwise it's just a pretty picture, right? Looking for confirmation from my colleagues, right? Yes.
Okay, so now I have two questions because I've heard from some artists the opposite, which is my art speaks for itself and each person who comes to it will bring a different meaning to it and that's fine and that's what it's meant to be. So I wonder like how that fits within the framework that you're talking about. And then also, where did the pottery come from? Did you make it? Did you break it? Where did it come from?
Okay, so in Vallauris, we went to the clay store and I bought a bag of clay, just like we all bought a bag of, like, I don't know, 20 pounds of clay. And the clay in Vallauris comes from the ground, not exactly, it's obvious out here. It was like, I was told by the ceramicist from Vincennes that the quality and feel of the clay, it was like porcelain, even though it was stoneware. It was this beautiful, beautiful clay that was just smooth and wonderful. And so we took the clay and you put it on what's called a slab roller, which is essentially like a giant rolling pin, and it rolls the clay flat. And then you let it dry with some plastic until it gets a little bit dry, but not all the way dry. And it has this leather-like feel to it, and you can fold it into shapes, kind of smooth the outside. It's really hard to get it perfectly smooth. And so I made the clay from a bag of clay. And then it was fired there, and then after it was fired, I projected onto it. Yeah, it was white. And so doing a critique, and the students say that. They say, I don't want to talk about it. I want people to interpret it. And you're giving away your power. Art is power. Art is a tool. Everyone, all the students, when you come to class, they are all sitting there staring at a piece of glass. And they are looking at art. They're looking at images made by people. Our students graduate and they make that work. And if you say you can interpret this how you want to, you've given away your power. Art is power. Whether it's music or theater or dance, you are communicating an idea. And if you say this is open to interpretation, you've given away your power. It's like, I wrote this poem, but it's meaningless. Why would I be interested in it? Why would you be interested in it? It's meaningless. Dr. Olivier said, I invited Dr. Olivier to come to an art critique because I was like, what happens if you make the music teacher look at art? And he was really cool, and he didn't know what to say, and someone said that I wanted to be open to interpretation. And he said when he was in school, he had composed something, and his instructor asked him, or the person, I think it was the composer, who's actually putting it together, and he said, what is this about? How should I introduce this? And he said, oh, I don't know, it's just something like that. And the composers, or the conductor said, we're going to play this piece, and it's called XYZ, and it's meaningless. Can you imagine? That sounds so awful. So I tell students all the time, don't give away your power. You call something untitled, that's your opportunity to point your viewer in the right direction. And yeah, art is power. Don't give it away. That's good. Let's end it there.
Tell us what you'd like to hear about in the future. Happy to get your comments, and also if you'd like to be added to our email list to learn about future